My name is Margaret Lane, and the morning I nearly lost everything. The floor was so cold it hurt my knees. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It was 4:42 a.m. when I slid my key into the metal door of the strip mall. The buzz of the fluorescent light above me flickered like it couldn't be bothered. The mop in my hand was older than my son's sneakers and heavier than I remembered. I hadn't slept in 2 days, not really. When your brain's always calculating how to stretch $27 over 5 days, rest becomes math, not peace. The janitorial job was quiet. That's the only good thing I can say about it. No one talked to me. No one looked at me. I was a shadow gliding between glass storefronts, cleaning up spilled coffee, Windexing smudged dreams off plate windows. That morning, I pulled the mop bucket behind me and stopped in front of the nail salon. Pink posters curled at the corners. Glitter flakes littered the floor. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. And then my phone buzzed in my back pocket, loud in the silence. It was a text from my landlord. "Rent due in full by Friday or you're out. No more extensions." I stared at the message for a full minute. My hands trembled. My phone screen faded to black. I knelt down, started scrubbing. I needed to keep moving. That's what I always did, keep moving. Think later. Half an hour later, my knees were soaked. I stood slowly, only to see a reflection of myself in the dark salon mirror, oversized hoodie hair tied up in a loose knot, and eyes so hollow I didn't recognize them. I looked like someone who had forgotten how to dream. By 6:30, I'd finished the salon and the vape shop next door. I took the bus to my second job, the diner across town. My manager, Carol, met me at the door with a sour face. "You're 5 minutes late," she said. I opened my mouth to apologize, but she waved it off and shoved a rag into my hands. "Just get to table 6 before they leave." That was my life. From mop to tray to bus to anxiety. Repeat. By noon, I was on my feet for 8 hours straight. My stomach growled, but I didn't order anything. I only had $3 cash left, and my son Theo had outgrown his shoes again. He never complained, just curled his toes and said they felt fine. He was 11 and already more of a man than the one who had walked out on us when Theo was 2. During my 10-minute break, I sat on an upturned milk crate behind the kitchen and checked my voicemail. There were 2 from the school nurse. Theo had gotten dizzy in gym class and they thought it might be low blood sugar, and 1 from the power company. A final warning before disconnection. I covered my face with my hands and didn't cry. Crying felt like a luxury, like sleeping in or dessert. Instead, I whispered, "I just need one thing to go right. One thing." That night after my shift, I walked back to the strip mall to collect the rag I'd left behind. As I approached, I noticed the back dumpster lid propped open. Something white stuck out, a notebook. I'm not sure why I grabbed it. Maybe because it wasn't mine. Maybe because I hadn't held anything that felt like paper instead of plastic in a while. It was a ledger, handwritten messy. Item lists, profit margins, notes like April overordered again. Still can't crack the cookie cost. And losing close every week, but the frosting's amazing. There were sticky notes with calculations, scribbles, ideas. Something inside me, the part I thought had died, flickered. I used to be good at this. Numbers, strategy, systems. Before I became someone who disappeared behind a uniform. I tucked the ledger into my bag and walked home through cold air. My apartment smelled like mildew and leftover anxiety. Theo was asleep on the couch, a hand-drawn map of galaxies still clutched in his hand. His shoelaces were torn. I covered him with my coat. I sat down at the chipped kitchen table, opened the notebook, and read until my eyes burned. The handwriting grew shakier as the pages went on, desperation embedded in every line. The shop had failed. But something in those margins felt like a map. Or a message. Or maybe a dare. I didn't know it yet, but that tattered book of someone else's failure was going to be the first seed in a life I didn't even know I had the right to want. I closed the cover and whispered, "There has to be more than this." That night, I fell asleep with my head on the notebook. And for the first time in years, my dreams didn't end in fear. They ended in fire. The next morning, the choice was simple gas or groceries. I had enough money for one, not both. I stood at the gas station pump holding a crumpled $5 bill and trying to calculate how many miles it could get me. Theo needed lunch, but I needed to get to work. My stomach growled in protest, but my head stayed silent. Silence had become a skill. You can't hear fear if you don't let it speak. I put $3 in the tank and kept $2 for a can of soup and a banana. At the diner, Carol didn't look up when I walked in, but I caught the tail end of her conversation with the cook, my name spoken in a sharp whisper. "She's one of those people," she said. "You can just see it. Like they're stuck in survival mode. You give them a break, and they waste it." I pretended not to hear, just tied my apron and took table three's order. But her words stuck like gum under a booth. One of those people. I'd been called worse. But something about how casually she said it, like I was a diagnosis, not a person, made me burn. That afternoon during my break, I found myself staring at that old ledger again. The paper smelled like ink and desperation, but also hope. Or maybe I was imagining it. That night after Theo fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table again. Notebook open, calculator app blinking. I started typing numbers into an online pricing tool: cost per unit, packaging estimates, ingredient sourcing. I remembered things I hadn't thought about in a decade. In another life, I had studied business administration, only for a year. Then Theo came along and his father disappeared with a shrug and a backpack. I dropped out and never looked back. But now, numbers were coming back. Like an old language. One margin scribble in the notebook caught my eye. Can't source butter cheap enough. Killing profit. I opened 3 browser tabs and started researching bulk baking supplies. My heart started racing. I wasn't sure if it was anxiety or excitement. Probably both. At 2 a.m., I made my first fake call. "Hi, yes, I'm inquiring about your wholesale pricing for industrial mixers. I'm comparing vendors for a small commercial kitchen I manage." My voice didn't even shake. I sounded believable, professional. I wrote down everything, every quote, every supplier contact, every used listing I found within bus distance. By sunrise, I hadn't slept, but I had a list, an idea, a dream so fragile I didn't dare speak it aloud. I cleaned the strip mall that morning like a woman with a secret. My hands worked. My mind ran. In the alley behind the vape shop, I found a flyer stapled to a wooden pole. Storage auction Saturday 9 a.m. contents of 3 unpaid units to be sold to highest bidder. My pulse skipped. I tore the flyer down, folded it twice, and slipped it into my pocket. I didn't have money to bid. Not really, but I had a little saved in an emergency jar tucked behind the cereal. This felt like an emergency of the soul. At the diner the next night, I served a table of real estate agents. They laughed too loud and tipped too little. One of them said to me, "You ever think about getting out of this life?" I smiled without smiling. Every day. They laughed like I was joking. The next morning, I walked into the bank with my shoulders back and my hair brushed into something that vaguely resembled a bun. I wore my nicest shirt, which still had a stain near the hem, and a jacket that hadn't fit right in years. I told the woman at the counter I was calling about storage liens. I was assisting a client and needed details about defaulted units. I don't know if she believed me or just didn't care, but she gave me a name and address. The units had been unpaid for months. One belonged to a bakery that had gone under 2 years ago. The equipment inside was rumored to still be intact. But who knows if any of it works, she said. It didn't matter if it worked. It mattered if it was mine. Saturday morning, I stood at the auction site with $267 in an envelope, everything I had. Theo sat beside me, rubbing his eyes and yawning. I told him we were there to watch. He didn't ask questions. He never did. He trusted me, even when I didn't. The first unit went for $800. Furniture, old electronics. The second was locked. The third, the bakery one, opened with a screech of metal and the smell of flour, rust, and old dreams. I saw shelves mixing bowls, cracked trays, and something large and silver covered in a dusty tarp. The auctioneer said, "All right, what's your starting bid?" No one spoke. One man chuckled. "It's all junk. Smells like mice." I raised my hand. 100. Snickers behind me. The auctioneer shrugged. 100 going once. Going twice. 200, I said quickly. Sold. Just like that, I own something. Theo looked up at me. Did we win? I looked into that unit like it was a cathedral. No, I said. We just started. The smell of flour and rust hit me hard when I stepped inside the storage unit. Dust clung to the air like regret. Most people would have turned away, called it garbage, and walked back to their clean cars and full fridges. But I saw something else. I saw opportunity. Or maybe I was just desperate enough to hallucinate it. The mixer under the tarp was huge, industrial grade. The kind you'd find in a real bakery, not a home kitchen. It was dented, the metal dull and scraped, but the motor casing looked intact. I found a plug and tested it. A low hum, a deep mechanical growl. It still worked. I nearly cried. There were also baking sheets, piping tools, empty frosting bags, and old business cards from Sweet Rise Bakery, now defunct. A tattered apron hung from a nail. I folded it gently and placed it in the box like I was preserving someone's dream. Maybe someday someone would do that for me. Theo helped me load the van we rented for 2 hours. The smell of metal and old yeast filled the air. I didn't even mind. We had to make 2 trips, the second one in the rain. But we did it. Everything ended up in our kitchen. And I mean, everything. By midnight, our tiny one-bedroom apartment smelled like a bakery with a grudge. Theo was asleep on the couch again, and I stood in the middle of chaos, flour in the air mixer, roaring sink overflowing with utensils. I had no business plan, no logo, no clue, just memory. You see, I grew up watching my mother bake in a cramped kitchen in Georgia. We didn't have much, but we always had cakes on Sundays. She called it soul sugar, the kind of sweetness that didn't just sit on your tongue, but softened your heart. I started with her old cornbread cake recipe. It was simple, fast, and cheap. I had the ingredients memorized. The first batch came out overbaked, the edges too dark, the center collapsed. But the second batch, golden. I wrapped it in parchment paper and walked 2 blocks to the local barber shop. Inside, 3 men played dominoes and nodded when I stepped in. "You selling something?" one of them asked. "Not officially," I said, "but I baked too much. Want a slice?" They hesitated, then shrugged. 1 bite each. One of them muttered, "Damn." Another said, "Got any more?" "No," I said, "but I will tomorrow." By the end of that week, I was baking through the night and handing out samples by noon. I didn't charge at first. Just handed out wrapped slices and told people where I lived. Word started spreading. It was slow, but steady. People knocked on my door asking, "You got any more of that cake?" The neighbor upstairs offered to trade childcare for cornbread. The mailman left a sticky note on my door. "Save me a piece." And then I got my first real call. A woman named Tasha, who ran a small flea market booth, said she'd tried my cake through a friend and wanted to know if I'd be willing to sell 6 loaves on commission. I didn't even hesitate. Yes. When and where that Saturday, I packed my cakes into thrifted Tupperware, tucked Theo's sketchbook into my bag, and borrowed a card table from a neighbor. We took the bus to the market before dawn and set up under a faded tarp next to a booth selling handmade earrings. The first few hours were rough. People walked past like we were invisible. A man in a keto warrior shirt made a joke about carbs being poverty food. I smiled and nodded. But then a teenage girl walked by with a giant iced coffee and paused. "What's that smell? Cornbread cake," I said. "Sweet. Southern." She bought one slice, took a bite, stopped walking. "Oh my God," she said. "This is like a hug from a grandma I never met." She took a selfie with the slice, tagged it on social media, and walked off smiling. An hour later, 3 more girls showed up. "Are you the cornbread cake lady?" I nodded. By noon, we sold out. Theo looked up at me like I'd turned water into gold. "Mom," he whispered, "you're trending." I laughed for the first time in what felt like years. That night we walked home under the streetlights. I had $68 in a plastic container. My shoes hurt, my back ached, but I felt tall. We passed the diner on the way back. Carol stood outside, smoking face buried in her phone. She didn't see me, but I saw her, and I didn't feel small. The phone call that changed everything started with a lie. I was standing in line at the dollar store with flour on my jacket, and Theo asking if he could get a pack of colored pencils when my phone buzzed. Blocked number. I answered anyway. That's how hungry I was, not for food, but for possibility. "Hello," a woman's voice answered. "Hi, I'm looking for Maggie Lane. I was given your number by Tasha from the flea market." I straightened. "This is she. I run a food tent at the first Friday market downtown. I'm short a dessert vendor for next week. Can you handle 200 portions?" I blinked. 200. But instead of saying no, which I absolutely should have, I said, "Yes. That's perfect." "Great. I'll email over the vendor permit and table specs. You'll need signage and packaging. Do you have a brand name?" That's when the lie slipped out. I don't know why I said it or how it came to me. Maybe because of all the years I thought I'd never be anything. Maybe I needed to believe I already was. "Yes," I said. "It's called Soul Sugar Co. Nice ring to it. See you Friday." I hung up and nearly dropped the phone. Theo looked up at me. "What's Soul Sugar?" I smiled nervously. "Our future." That week was chaos. I slept maybe 8 hours total. I borrowed a friend's kitchen after dark, traded 4 cakes for use of her double oven. I learned how to design a label on a free trial website, printed 200 stickers at the library, and spent $30 on clear wrap and brown paper boxes. I cut corners, burned a tray, cried in the bathroom at 2 a.m. and whispered to myself, "You asked for this. Now rise to it." By Thursday night, my apartment looked like a war zone made of vanilla sugar and flour, but every box was packed. Friday morning, I put on my cleanest jeans, the blouse my sister had sent me from Atlanta 3 birthdays ago, and pinned my makeshift logo to the front of the tablecloth. The market was buzzing. Music, laughter, food, smoke in the air. I was shaking so badly I couldn't hold the payment reader steady. But then the first woman walked up. She picked up a cornbread cake, inspected it, and asked, "You the one they're all talking about online?" I nodded. She smiled. About time we had some real soul food here. By the end of the night, I was wiped out. Literally. Sold every single unit. Got 3 offers for future pop-ups. One woman wanted to book me for a corporate lunch. I walked home with $400 in my backpack and a grin I couldn't shake. But the victory didn't last long. That Sunday, Carol called me in early to the diner. I was tired, sore, but still glowing inside. "You're late," she snapped as I walked in, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's 8:57, I said, glancing at the clock. She gave me a long, cold stare. "I heard you've been selling things at markets." My stomach dropped. Yes, but only on days off." She folded her arms. "We don't need distracted help. I need people who are committed, focused." I stared at her, heat rising in my chest. All the swallowed words over the years rushed to the surface. I've worked every double shift you've thrown at me. I've covered for sick coworkers, stayed past closing, and cleaned your messes without complaint. I'm allowed to try to build something for myself. She raised an eyebrow. Not on my time. You mean not on your leash? I said softly. She flinched. I took off my apron and laid it on the counter. You don't get to fire me, I said. I'm done. Her mouth opened, then closed again. I walked out into the morning air. My knees were shaking. My throat was tight. But I didn't look back. That night I told Theo we'd be figuring it out on our own now. He looked worried. We don't have enough money, do we? Not yet, I said. But I have enough courage to get us there. He nodded. I'll help. We packed boxes together. We rolled stickers. He drew a new logo, a heart made of sugar cubes. I taped it above the sink. And just like that, we weren't surviving anymore. We were building. I opened the rusted unit one more time, not out of need but out of reverence. It had given me more than secondhand equipment. It had given me a second life. Inside, wedged behind an old cooler, I spotted something I hadn't noticed before, an unopened crate of vanilla extract, bulk-sized and sealed. I unscrewed one bottle and inhaled. Pure, expensive, and perfectly usable. I smiled. My luck was shifting. Not because things were suddenly easy, but because I was finally in motion. Back home, our kitchen was humming again. The industrial mixer sat like a throne beside the sink, taking up half the counter space. But it roared like it belonged. I began testing a new recipe, something my mama used to make only on special holidays: brown butter pecan cookies with dark molasses drizzle. I'd avoided them before, too delicate, too temperamental. But now I had something to prove. Not to customers, to myself. The first batch came out underbaked. The second burned. The third, they melted on the tongue. Rich, deep, complex. Just like I wanted to be. The week after quitting the diner, I used the last of my savings to rent a booth at a local artisan market. The vendor beside me sold hand-poured candles. Her name was Doreen. She was chatty, sweet, and confident. How long you been doing this? She asked as we set up side by side. I shrugged. Not long. You don't seem new. That surprised me. Really? She nodded. You've got the posture of a woman who's walking into her own story. I didn't know how to respond to that. So I smiled and offered her a cookie. By noon, I had sold half my inventory. By 2 p.m., I had sold out. People came back for more, bringing friends. One woman asked if I had a mailing list. I lied and said yes. That night, I created one. Every dollar I made went back into the business flower packaging secondhand trays. Theo and I would sit on the floor sticking labels and folding boxes. He liked to sing while we worked. Sugar and rise mama's eyes, he crooned one night. What is that? I laughed. My jingle for the business? He grinned. I'm gonna be the marketing guy. I ruffled his hair. You already are. 2 weeks later, I got a call that made my heart skip. A woman named Jamie had tried my cookies at the artisan market. She ran a boutique hotel downtown and was looking for a local vendor to supply desserts for their afternoon tea service. Nothing fancy, just real handmade goods with soul. I remember your label, she said. Soul Sugar Co. That's you, right? Yes, I said, heart pounding. That's me. She asked for a tasting. I invited her to our apartment. I was embarrassed, wished I had a real office, a glossy kitchen. But I didn't want to fake it. Jamie arrived in a crisp blazer, heels clicking against my chipped linoleum. She smiled at the plate of cookies like they were old friends. These, she said, after the first bite, taste like childhood and rebellion. I blinked. That's exactly what I was going for. She laughed. Then we're aligned. Let's start with 20 dozen a week. My breath caught. 20 dozen? Yes, absolutely. When she left, I sat down slowly on the kitchen stool and stared at the wall. Then I laughed. I laughed so hard my stomach hurt. Then I cried. It was happening, but the joy didn't last long. That Friday, I came home to find a red notice taped to our door. Final eviction warning. I had miscalculated spending on ingredients packaging the new booth fee, thinking I could make rent from next week's order. I sank to the floor. Theo found me an hour later staring at nothing. "What's wrong?" I handed him the notice. He read it, then sat beside me. "Are we moving again?" I didn't answer. He looked at me with eyes too grown for his age. "Mama, we've been through worse. You always figure it out." I wanted to believe him. That night, I baked the entire Jamie order without resting. I loaded them into boxes, labeled them, and called her early the next morning. "I know I'm not scheduled to deliver until Monday," I said, "but I'd love to bring them today fresh." She agreed. As I handed off the boxes, I asked her bluntly, "Do you know anyone renting commercial kitchen space? Cheaply?" She paused. "I might. There's a church in East End. They lease their basement kitchen to food vendors. It's not glamorous, but it's clean and certified." I called the number she gave me before I even left the hotel. By noon, I was signing a shared use agreement. $300 a month. Key access. All utilities included. I used the Jamie order money to pay the deposit. When I returned to the apartment, I posted a notice on our community board, looking for short-term sublet. Quiet tenant. Immediate availability. By Sunday night, someone had responded. A traveling nurse looking for a 6-week crash pad. We packed fast. Theo didn't even flinch. "Where are we gonna live?" I smiled faintly. "In the back of the bakery." Technically, it wasn't legal. But the church had a spare storage room behind the kitchen large enough for a twin mattress, a lamp, and hope. I laid blankets on the floor, hung a curtain for privacy, and told Theo it was just a sleepover from the universe. We lived like that for 37 days. And I have never worked harder or slept deeper. I would bake until 3 a.m., then collapse beside my son's hands still dusted in flour. Because I wasn't just making cookies anymore. I was making a future. The church basement kitchen became my kingdom. The walls were tiled in yellowing white, the sinks perpetually dripped, and the floor groaned with every step. But the oven worked. The mixer sang. And I had keys. Every morning at 4 a.m., I would wake up to the faint sound of cars outside and the quiet snore of Theo beside me. I'd slide out from under the blankets, tuck him in tighter, and start my day in the only shoes I owned that didn't hurt my feet. At first, it was just fulfilling Jamie's orders. But then she referred me to 2 other boutique hotels. One offered their guest room minibars for my miniature butter cakes. The other wanted nostalgic snacks for turn-down service. Apparently, nostalgia was trending. I was baking close to 500 units a week now. I was still doing everything by hand. Theo helped when he could, usually after school though. After school now meant doing homework under fluorescent lights and falling asleep in a sleeping bag behind stacked flour bags. One night, while I was triple wrapping a tray of lemon sugar cookies, Theo looked up from his notebook and asked, "Are we poor?" I froze. The question had no judgment, no fear. It was curious, honest. "I don't know," I said after a long pause. "I think we're in between chapters." He nodded, satisfied. "Then I'll call this one the middle cookie era." I laughed so loud it startled a choir group rehearsing upstairs. But laughter or not, the fatigue was catching up to me. One morning, I collapsed in the middle of cleaning a mixing bowl. My knees buckled. My arms trembled. I had to sit against the pantry door and count backward to calm the dizziness. I hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. I didn't even notice. That scared me. I sat on the floor and forced myself to eat 2 cookies and drink water. Then I wrote a list titled, "Fix This." At the top, I wrote 1, "Get help." That same day, I posted a flyer on the church bulletin board: baking assistant needed evenings and weekends. Must love sugar and hustle. Pay $10 HR and all the cookies you can eat. 2 days later, a girl named Ruby showed up. She was 20, full of nervous energy and bright lipstick. She'd dropped out of college and needed work that felt real. I hired her on the spot. Training her was terrifying. Letting go of control, even just measuring flour, felt like handing over my child. But she caught on fast. "Your cookies taste like honesty," she said one night. I blinked. What does honesty taste like? Like something made by hands that haven't quit. Ruby became my right hand, and the hours that used to blur into exhaustion began to shape into structure. I got sleep. Theo got help with homework. We started to live, not just survive. Orders kept growing. Jamie introduced me to a woman who ran a small wedding planning company. She needed favors for receptions and custom boxes for engagement parties. Then a coffee shop asked for weekly inventory. Then a school fundraiser. The church kitchen couldn't hold us anymore. I started looking for a rental kitchen space, something legitimate, something I could scale into. I found a listing for a shared commercial kitchen 40 minutes away. It was clean certified and empty every morning until 10 a.m. I booked a visit. The building was cold and industrial but functional. Metal counters locked dry storage, proper ventilation. The rent was steep, $700 a month. It made me sick just thinking about it. But as I walked through the space, I saw it. Not the ugly tile or the dim lights, but a line of ovens filled with trays, Ruby boxing orders, Theo sitting at a desk doing math problems while sipping cocoa. I said yes. The day we moved the mixer from the church basement to the new space, I cried in the car. Theo squeezed my hand and said, "I think we're in a new chapter now." He was right. We were growing. But growth came with costs. I was working 16-hour days. Ruby took on more shifts. I hired a part-time delivery driver, Clara, who had lost her job at the post office and needed stability. We became a team. A tribe of tired, flour-covered women determined not to drown. We branded more aggressively. Ruby created a Soul Sugar Comer Instagram and started posting reels of the baking process, slow-motion icing drizzles, cookie breaks. Theo's giggle when he taste tested. It went mini viral. One video hit 12,000 views in 2 days. Orders spiked. We had to turn people away. People started asking if we were a real business. And I realized I didn't even have an LLC. I filed the paperwork that night. It cost $127. I paid it in 3 parts. When the confirmation came through that Soul Sugar Commerce was legally mine, I sat in the car outside the kitchen and stared at my phone screen until the battery died. I had built something real. But more than that, I had built something mine. The morning of my first full-scale market booth felt like opening night on Broadway, only with less makeup and more powdered sugar on my jeans. It was a spring artisan fair larger than anything I'd ever attempted. Rows of white tents filled the downtown park, people wandering with coffee cups and tote bags, music floating through the air. The kind of event where influencers took pictures, where moms compared gluten-free brownies, and where food vendors made or broke their season. I had paid nearly $300 for the booth. To me, it was everything. Ruby helped me set up. We had 3 folding tables covered in thrifted burlap wooden crates, filled with stacked pastries, and a chalkboard sign that said in curly letters, "Soul Sugar Ku Nostalgia, you can taste." Theo stood beside it proudly, handing out samples in tiny paper cups. Traffic was slow at first. A few passers-by smiled politely, took samples, kept walking. I watched other booths with flashy banners, credit card readers on shiny stands, influencers filming slow-motion cake cuts. And then came the laughter. 3 women in floral dresses walked past and snickered as they read our sign. One of them said loudly, "Soul Sugar." "That's cute. Looks like a PTA bake sale." They didn't look at me, didn't need to. The mockery landed like a slap anyway. Ruby touched my elbow. "Ignore them." But I couldn't. Not entirely. It took every ounce of restraint not to crumble. Then, as if fate was watching, a man in a black t-shirt stopped at the table. He picked up a cookie, chewed slowly, and said, "You made this?" I nodded. "Reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen in North Carolina," he said. "I haven't tasted anything like this in 20 years. He bought 6 boxes. That was the crack in the dam. One by one, people came. First a trickle, then a stream. A young couple ordered a dozen of the molasses pecan cookies for a baby shower. A woman asked if we catered corporate luncheons. A man bought 2 cakes to ship to his mama. By noon, we had lines. People were taking photos, tagging us. The Instagram account run by Ruby buzzed nonstop. I watched as Theo, beaming, handed a woman a tiny wrapped cake bite and said, "This one tastes like Saturdays." That's when I knew we weren't selling food. We were selling memory. By day's end, we had cleared over $2,000 in sales. I had never held that much money in my hands at once. I wanted to frame the bills like artwork. We packed up in silence, exhausted but giddy. As we loaded the last crate into the van, Ruby grinned. "They laughed at your sign. And then they bought out your table." "They did," I said softly. I didn't say what I was really thinking, that every insult, every eviction notice, every overnight shift cleaning restaurants had led here. But I felt it. 2 days later, a customer from the fair messaged the Instagram account. She was a freelance food writer and wanted to do a short feature on Soul Sugar Cohen for a local lifestyle blog. I agreed nervously. She showed up with a small camera and an endless list of questions about my history, my recipes, my goals. "What made you start this?" I hesitated. I could have said 1,000 things. Survival. My son. Spite. Hunger. But I looked down at my hands covered in powdered sugar and confidence and said I started because no one else was going to build this for me. The article came out a week later. It was short. Simple. Sweet. But the effect was immediate. We got a call from a mid-size events company looking for a dessert vendor, then another from a pop-up dinner group, then a curious message from a small chain grocery asking if we offered wholesale. I read that last one 3 times. Wholesale? I had no idea how to do wholesale, but I wasn't about to say no. I called Clara, our part-time delivery driver, and asked if she'd be willing to take on more shifts. "I can try," she said. "But I'll need help, maybe a route map." I drew one on a napkin, and we called it a business plan. Meanwhile, I stayed up every night, Googling packaging requirements, food safety codes, bulk pricing margins. I called the county office and registered for an official food handler's permit. I had to attend a class and pass a test. I took it twice. Passed on the second try. Progress. Still, I was exhausted. One night, Theo sat across from me at the folding table where we both did our work. "You look tired," he said. "I am. You don't smile as much anymore." That stopped me cold. I had been so focused on the mountain in front of me, I hadn't noticed the view behind me. I reached across and held his hand. "I'm still me," I said. "Just becoming a bigger version." He nodded. "Well, you're big enough. Just don't disappear." "Okay." I hugged him so tight he squeaked. That night, I baked a batch of cookies just for us. No orders, no pressure, just joy. Theo called them quiet cookies. We ate them on the floor in silence, just mother and son, soul and sugar. In that moment, I realized the business wasn't the dream, the life I was finally living that was. A few weeks after the article, I got a call I almost didn't answer. It came during dinner, such as it was, a paper plate of scrambled eggs and toast eaten on a milk crate in the back of the kitchen. Theo was reading comics. Ruby was cleaning trays. Unknown number. My instinct was to ignore it. But something said, "Pick up." "Hello, hi. Is this Margaret Lane?" "Yes. My name is Devin Collins. I'm a producer with Local Roots TV. We came across the Soul Sugar Cumbers story in the Gazette blog, and we'd love to feature you for our Women of Hustle segment." I blinked. "TV, yes, ma'am. A 5-minute spotlight. We film a short documentary a day in the life. Are you interested? I couldn't breathe for a second. I. I'd have to think about it. Of course. We're just fans of what you're doing, and you've got the kind of grit our audience responds to. Let me know by Friday. When I hung up, Theo stared at me. Who was that? I repeated it all to him. He sat up wide-eyed. Mom. TV. That's huge. I felt sick. TV meant visibility, scrutiny, questions. People who might look at my cheap packaging and secondhand mixers and call me a fraud. And yet, that night I lay awake staring at the ceiling of our cramped back room, the hum of the fridge in the distance. I remembered all the nights I'd prayed just to be seen. Not pitied seen. This was it. I called Devin back in the morning and said yes. The crew came the following Tuesday. 2 camera guys, 1 sound girl, and a bubbly woman named Cassie, with a clipboard full of release forms and a vision for my narrative arc. They filmed everything: Theo packing boxes, me mixing batter, Ruby piping, icing, with focus. At one point, Cassie asked me to stand in front of the camera and describe what it felt like to go from janitor to business owner. I froze. Not because I didn't know, because I knew too well. It feels like crawling out of a locked box, I said slowly. A box people said I belonged in. For being broke, for being a single mom, for dreaming too big while owning too little. And every step forward still feels like someone's going to push me back inside. She nodded, eyes glassy. By the time they left, I was emotionally wrecked, but proud. The segment aired 2 weeks later. I didn't even know it had gone live until I got a call from a woman in Michigan wanting to order cookies by mail. Then another from Texas. Then an email from someone in Seattle who said, "You reminded me I'm not done." Orders exploded. Our Instagram gained 5,000 followers in a weekend. My inbox was chaos, but it wasn't all sugar. With the attention came pressure. People began asking, "When are you opening a storefront? Do you ship nationally? Do you offer wedding cakes? Custom gluten-free, keto-friendly corporate holiday boxes?" The business, once my quiet place of healing, became a loud room with too many voices. I didn't sleep much those weeks. Ruby pulled me aside one night. "You've got to start saying no." "I can't," I whispered. "What if the momentum dies?" She looked at me with kindness and just said, "What if you do?" That landed hard. So I stopped. Stopped overbooking. Stopped agreeing to every custom order. Stopped pretending I could do the work of 10 people on 4 hours of sleep and coffee. Instead, I did what I'd never done before. I asked for help. I applied for a micro-business grant from the city. I hired a part-time bookkeeper, older woman named Denise Sharp, as a tack, and full of stories. I brought on another baker, Carla, to assist Ruby. And for the first time ever, I took a weekend off. Theo and I went to the lake. Just us. No flour, no emails, no boxes. We skipped rocks, ate gas station ice cream, slept in a borrowed tent, and laughed at how the mosquitoes always chose me. One night by the fire, Theo said, "Do you miss who you used to be?" I looked at him. "No," I said. "But I'm learning to love who I'm becoming." He smiled. "I love her too." When we came home, the kitchen felt different. Not like a prison of pressure, more like a headquarters, a launch pad. Orders kept rolling in, not at the chaos level of the TV segment, but steady. Loyal customers, repeat faces. Then came the envelope. Plain white, no return address. Inside was a typed letter on thick paper: Soul Sugar Co. has been nominated for the Small Business Impact Award. You've been selected as one of 5 finalists. The winner receives a $10,000 grant and business mentorship. I dropped it. Theo picked it up. "Mom," he asked, eyes wide. I didn't apply for this." He grinned. "Guess the world finally caught up to you." I stared at the letter, my hands shaking. $10,000. That was a new oven, a branded food truck, health insurance, a classroom for baking workshops. Hope. I looked around the kitchen dusty corners, duct-taped mixer handwritten labels. My army of strong women. I hadn't arrived. But I wasn't stuck anymore. The award ceremony was scheduled for a Thursday night at the downtown Civic Center. I hadn't worn a dress in over a decade, but Ruby lent me one navy blue, simple soft. Theo insisted I wear the gold pin he'd made out of a paperclip and an old bottle cap that read, CEO, Cookie Excellence Officer. I pinned it to my chest like armor. The room buzzed with entrepreneurs. Some wore suits tailored to success. Others, like me, wore borrowed confidence. There were food trucks, tech startups, artisan crafts. Everyone seemed to know someone I knew no one, until I heard my name. Maggie. I turned to see Doreen, the candle vendor from the first market I'd ever sold at. Her smile was huge. "You made it," she said, hugging me. "I told you. You walk like a woman who belongs to her own story." My throat tightened. "I never forgot you." They called the finalists to the stage one by one. When they said Soul Sugar Coup, the applause startled me. I stood next to people with 5 employees' websites with testimonials, investors in the crowd. I had a chalkboard sign and a dream stitched together with sleep deprivation. The host began reading off the accomplishments of each nominee. When they spoke about mine, I felt like they were describing someone else. Margaret Lane. From janitor to culinary entrepreneur, a mother, a mentor, a woman who took a second-hand mixer and built a community with cookies. I couldn't breathe. They opened the envelope. And the 2025 Small Business Impact Award goes to Soul Sugar Co. I didn't hear anything else. I stepped forward, hands numb. Ruby shrieked behind me. Theo was jumping up and down. I walked to the mic, unsure if my knees would make it. I looked out at the crowd and somehow found my voice. "My name is Maggie Lane," I said. "And I don't have a fancy quote, but I have a truth. Some of us weren't born into success. Some of us had to bake our way to it. Thank you for tasting mine." Applause filled the room, but the sweetest moment came later in the quiet. Back in the kitchen just after midnight, I sat in my usual spot stool, chipped counter tea in a chipped mug. Theo had gone to bed. Ruby had gone home. I opened the check again. $10,000. I didn't see numbers. I saw a bakery with real floors, an oven that didn't wheeze, a logo on boxes, a name that meant something. I saw freedom. I folded the check gently and placed it in a recipe book. Then I wiped the counter, set the timer for 5 a.m., and whispered to the empty room, "We're just getting started." The check sat untouched on my kitchen counter for 2 whole weeks. Not because I didn't need it, in fact, I needed it more than I needed sleep. The old mixer moaned like it was on its last breath. Ruby had started bringing her own knives from home because ours were so dull, and the packaging supplier had raised their rates again. I was patching the business together with sheer willpower and duct tape. And yet, I couldn't cash the check. Every morning, I'd glance at it while pouring coffee, and my stomach would knot. I wasn't afraid of using the money. I was afraid of what it meant: change, growth. Letting go of the fragile little system I'd built out of desperation. It meant not just surviving, but stepping into something bigger. Theo finally asked me one night. We were boxing custom wedding favors, cinnamon cardamom cookies hand-tied with twine. "Why haven't you used the money?" he said, quiet but direct. I glanced up from the ribbons. "Because the next step means I can't do it all myself anymore." He blinked. "Isn't that the point?" I didn't answer. But that question sank deeper than he knew. Every corner of Soul Sugar Co. had my fingerprints on it, from the cracked kitchen tile where I dropped the first tray of burnt lemon bars to the smudged ledger where I used to scribble late-night orders on the back of Theo's homework. This was my sanctuary, my battlefield, my lifeline. And letting it grow meant risking it all. but staying small meant suffocating. That night, I stayed up making a list: a commercial-grade mixer, a new packaging supplier, health and safety consultant, proper inventory system, down payment on a real storefront. I stared at the last one. The word storefront looked like a magic spell. Like a fantasy I wasn't sure I was allowed to say out loud. The next morning, I called Denise, our part-time bookkeeper and my unofficial therapist. What would it take for us to get a commercial space? She didn't even pause. 3 months of runway, a smart lease, some pain. I laughed. So, normal then. Exactly. We began looking. The first location had flickering lights and smelled like mildew. The second was twice the price and half the space. I nearly gave up. But then, 3 blocks from Theo's school, I saw it, a dusty corner unit with a wide window and a sun-bleached sign: laundromat closed. It was empty, forgotten. But when I peeked inside, something clicked. High ceilings, exposed beams, pipes already in place, and more importantly, possibility. The landlord met me there the next day. He was older with a skeptical face. "You're a baker?" I nodded. "Yes. I own Soul Sugar Co." He frowned. "You got a staff?" "We're small," I said, "but real." He looked me up and down. "This place hasn't had a tenant in 2 years." I smiled. "Then maybe it's time something sweet moved in." He cracked a grin. 3 months up front, I pulled out the check and slid it across the counter. That night, when I unlocked the door for the first time, I just stood there, alone in the dust, keys in hand, heart pounding. It felt like entering a cathedral, a holy kind of silence, a blank canvas for a future I didn't dare imagine until now. We got to work immediately. Ruby and I ripped up old linoleum with crowbars. Clara's brother painted the walls in exchange for peanut butter brownies. Theo chose the color for the back office: warm honey, he called it. Denise handled permits and paperwork like a warrior. When the new industrial mixer arrived, gleaming in brushed steel, I cried. No, I wept. It looked like a monument to every night I scraped batter out of plastic bowls and prayed I wouldn't burn the last batch. Ruby placed her hand on it like it was sacred. "We've made it," she whispered. Not quite, but we were close. Opening day was simple. No PR team, no press, just hand-painted signs, word of mouth, and one Facebook post that Clara's niece made go viral. We gave away cookies, maple pecan molasses, crinkles, and the crowd favorite buttered sweet tea loaves. The line went around the block. A woman brought her elderly grandmother, who said our cookies tasted like the ones she used to bake before arthritis took her hands. A teenager came by after school and cried because our chocolate walnut brownies reminded her of her late father. We sold out by noon. We sold out the next day, too. And again, the next. By the end of the first week, our revenue exceeded what we used to make in a whole month. But the real moment, the one that I'll hold on to forever, came on Sunday. We had just closed for the day. I was wiping down the glass display when I saw Theo sitting by the window, his math workbook open, sunlight catching in his curls. He looked up, gave me a tired smile, and said something that stopped time. "Mom, it feels like our name finally showed up in the world." I sat beside him, apron still dusted in flour. "It does," I said. "We're not invisible anymore." He leaned his head on my shoulder. "Promise we'll never go back." I didn't hesitate. "Never," I said. "Not in body, not in spirit. We've left that life behind." Later that evening, I stood alone, locking the front door. The air smelled like brown sugar and fresh beginnings. The key turned with a soft click. Not an end, but a claim. A declaration. This was ours now. Not a dream. Not a maybe. A life built from scratch and baked into reality. Success is heavier than failure. No one tells you that. When we were barely scraping by, every little win, one big order, a good review, an extra tip, felt like a miracle. Now, with a storefront, a line out the door, and a shiny new mixer, the stakes had multiplied. So had the weight on my back. The first week felt like flying. The second felt like falling and pretending it was still flight. I was working 18-hour days baking before dawn, managing inventory by lunch, wiping tables, answering emails, and collapsing into bed just to dream about invoices. Ruby was a rock, but even she was limping through shifts. Clara's energy was waning too, and I knew burnout was at the door, knocking louder each day. It started with small things: a missing delivery, an order I forgot to double, a customer complaint about a stale muffin, something I swore would never happen. But what really rattled me was the city inspection. I hadn't expected it so soon. I'd filed all the permits. Yes, Denise had been thorough. But the inspector arrived on a Wednesday morning just as we'd sold out of our second tray of cranberry pistachio biscotti. He wore a badge, held a clipboard, and had the face of someone who'd seen too many grease traps and too few thank yous. He poked, he scribbled, he sniffed. Ruby tried to stay calm, offering him a cookie. He declined with a grunt. Then he looked up and said, "You're missing one ventilation compliance certificate." My stomach turned, but we submitted the application. He flipped the clipboard. "Application isn't approval. You'll have 30 days. Otherwise, we shut you down." Just like that. He handed me a warning slip and left. I stood in the center of the bakery, surrounded by the scent of brown butter and fear. Ruby touched my elbow gently. "It's okay," she said. "We'll fix it." But I didn't feel okay. I felt like a fraud. Like all of this had grown too fast, like I was just a woman with an apron pretending to be a business owner. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I just sat in the dark, reading every city code, every checklist, every regulation. My eyes burned. My hands shook. My brain wouldn't stop whispering, "You're in over your head." Theo came out of his room around 10. "You didn't come tuck me in." I blinked. I hadn't even realized it was bedtime. "I'm sorry, honey. There's a lot going on." He walked over slowly, eyeing the papers. "Are we in trouble?" "No, no," I said too quickly. "Just business stuff." He nodded, but his face tightened. "Do you ever wish you hadn't opened the shop?" The question hit like a slap. Not because it hurt, but because I'd asked myself the same thing just hours earlier. I forced a smile. Sometimes. But then I remember why I did. He tilted his head. Why I looked at him, really looked: his messy hair, his curious eyes, the smudge of chocolate on his sleeve. So you could see what it looks like when someone refuses to quit. He climbed into my lap and hugged me. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he whispered. I held him tighter than I ever had. The next morning, I called Denise. "We need to fast-track the ventilation cert." She didn't ask why. She just got to work. And I went back into the kitchen like I had something to prove. But as the days passed, the pressure mounted. Clara called out sick. Ruby had a family emergency. I ended up covering front and back, mixing dough, boxing pastries, taking payments, smiling through exhaustion so deep I could barely stand. I started making mistakes. Baking batches at the wrong temperature, using salt instead of sugar in one awful tray of breakfast scones. A customer spit one out, complained loudly, and stormed off. Theo was getting quieter. I missed 2 of his school meetings. He stopped asking me to walk him in the mornings. The guilt sat beside me at night like a second pillow. Was I becoming the kind of mother I swore I never would be? Too busy chasing stability to notice the cracks forming at home. One Friday evening, I finally broke. Ruby found me crouched in the walk-in fridge, crying over a batch of ruined lemon bars. She sat beside me on the cold floor. "Remember when we made 6 dozen cookies in your apartment and celebrated with takeout fries?" she said gently. I nodded. "We didn't have anything then. But we had each other." I laughed wetly. "Now we have deadlines and debt. And dreams that are growing faster than we expected," she said. "Which is good. But growth hurts. It always does. She helped me up. We remade the lemon bars together. Slowly. No music. No rush. Just sugar butter flour and breath. That night after closing, I finally let Theo show me the project he'd been working on. It was for school, a drawing titled My Family's Magic. In it, he'd drawn the bakery himself wearing an apron and me with glowing hands sprinkling light over a tray of cookies. I cried harder than I had in months. I messed up a lot this week, I whispered. He smiled. But you're still magic. And somehow that was enough. By Sunday, the ventilation certificate came through. We passed inspection. The next week, I hired a part-time assistant baker. Her name was Amy. She was young, eager, and meticulous. I trained her slowly, letting go inch by inch. It terrified me, but it also saved me. I started giving myself one afternoon off a week. I took Theo to the park. I began to breathe again. The bakery was still mine, but I no longer had to die to keep it alive, and that I realized was the real recipe for survival. Not just flour and sugar, but people. People who show up. People who catch you. People who remind you why you started, and the grace to let them help when your hands are full. I thought reaching stability would feel like resting on soft ground, but it turned out to be more like balancing on a beam. Every day demanded precision. A single misstep could still tumble it all. But now I wasn't walking the beam alone. Amy was fast becoming a cornerstone in our kitchen. She followed recipes to the gram, cleaned without being asked, and took initiative that made Ruby nod in cautious approval. Her youthful energy balanced Ruby's seasoned rhythm. Together, they started tweaking recipes I didn't have time to perfect, like the lavender shortbread that sold out in 2 hours flat. It felt good, necessary, and still terrifying. Delegating meant relinquishing pieces of control. I found myself rechecking things, hovering, rearranging trays they'd already organized. Ruby noticed. She pulled me aside during prep one morning. If you don't start trusting the people you've hired, you're going to burn through all of us, including yourself. I looked at her stunned. Hurt, even. But she wasn't wrong. I'd built this place from my blood, sweat, and overdraft notices. Trusting someone else with it felt like letting a stranger cradle your child. But I nodded. Okay, I said. You're right. It was time to shift. I stopped double-checking trays. I let Amy close the kitchen without me one night. I even let her design a new rotating special, a rosemary lemon cookie that was bright and earthy and sold like wildfire. Something in me relaxed. And in that space, that rare internal quiet, I began to dream again. We'd never had a brand beyond our name. Soul Sugar Co. had grown so quickly that we barely had a logo. Everything was handmade, handwritten, pieced together. So I reached out to a local graphic designer named Lena. She'd been a customer since day one, always complimenting our scones and quietly sketching in the corner booth. When I asked her if she'd be interested in rebranding the shop, she lit up. I already have ideas, she said. 2 weeks later, she brought me 3 concepts. All of them were lovely, but one took my breath away, a stylized sugar crystal, forming the shape of a heart nestled inside a warm serif S. It looked classic, soulful, and modern all at once. This, I said. This is us. We ordered new signage, new labels, new boxes. We scheduled a soft relaunch for the following month, not to erase what we'd built, but to mark our evolution. Theo helped too. He started drawing menu ideas, doodling new cookie names, helping at the front register after school. He even asked me one night if he could learn to bake something himself. Just one thing I can make really well. I gave him the peanut butter chocolate chunk recipe. He followed it with reverence, measuring everything meticulously. When the first batch came out slightly burnt, he looked up at me, frowning. "Why did yours always come out perfect?" I laughed. "They didn't. You just weren't old enough to notice when they didn't." We made another batch together, this time adjusting the temperature and pan placement. They came out golden gooey and warm. He boxed them himself and placed them on the front display with a little sign, Theo's first batch. They were gone by closing. When I handed him the $23 he earned from that tray, his face lit up. "I think I get it now," he said. "Get with the magic." And just like that, something settled between us, a shared sense of purpose. Not just mother and son, but partners in a small kind of legacy. But not all moments were warm. One night, just as we were closing up, a man I hadn't seen in nearly a decade walked through the door. My ex-husband. I hadn't heard from him since he disappeared when Theo was 4. No calls, no letters, just vanished into the void of his own selfishness. He stood in the doorway, the bell jingling softly behind him. The bakery went silent. Even the air felt heavy. Theo was in the back wiping counters. I stepped forward, heart thudding. "What are you doing here?" I said, voice like ice. He held up his hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble. You already have." He looked around. "You did all this?" I didn't respond. I didn't owe him awe or explanation. "I just wanted to see him," he said. I heard. "Through someone that you opened a shop. And that gave you the right to walk back in like a ghost." He looked down, then nodded. "I know I messed up." "No," I said, stepping closer. "You abandoned us. That's not a mess up. That's a coward's choice." Behind me, I heard footsteps. Theo. He froze when he saw the man. His face tightened, not with recognition but confusion. He didn't even remember him. "Mom," I stepped in front of him. "Go wait in the back, honey." But Theo didn't move. He looked between us. And then he said the most unexpected thing. "If he's my dad, I don't want him here." My ex flinched. I did too. Theo turned and walked away, calm but resolute. I didn't need to say anything else. The man left. Quietly. Without a scene. When the door closed behind him, I locked it, and with it a chapter I never needed reopened. I walked into the back where Theo was pretending to organize aprons. "Hey," I said gently. He looked up. "You okay?" He nodded. "I just didn't like how he looked at you. Like he deserved to." I knelt beside him. "You don't have to worry about him. He's not part of our story anymore." Theo didn't say anything, he just hugged me. And in that hug, I felt something real, the past losing its grip. We had made a life. A name. A place where we belonged. And no ghost from before could touch that now. It's strange how peace never arrives with trumpets. It tiptoes in quiet, almost suspicious. After the day my ex-husband walked out of the bakery, I expected a fallout. But what came instead was space. Space to breathe. Space to focus. Space to build. Theo didn't bring it up again. He returned to his usual rhythm school homework cookies. But something shifted in him. His questions grew deeper, his silences longer. I knew he was trying to make sense of the man who shared his blood but not his memories. So I waited. And in the meantime, I poured my energy into the bakery. Lena finalized the new packaging. Our boxes now carried our logo, that stylized sugar crystal heart, and on the bottom in tiny print it said, "Made with what we have. Grown from who we are." It felt like a vow. The relaunch day arrived with spring sunshine and nervous laughter. We didn't host a party, just opened the doors like any other day, but with fresh banners, new uniforms, and a counter full of reinvented favorites. Customers noticed. They smiled wider, asked about the logo, snapped photos, shared online. We trended locally. A food blogger posted a reel that hit 10,000 views in 2 hours. Orders tripled. It was thrilling. And exhausting. We had to hire another part-timer. Then another. Suddenly, I was managing a staff of 7: me, Ruby, Amy, Clara, part-time 2 cashiers, and a weekend barista named Leo, whose latte foam art made customers swoon. I had to learn how to manage people, not just tasks. That meant trust, patience, clear communication. And the hardest part, letting go of the illusion that I had to do it all to prove I was enough. I started setting boundaries. One day off a week became two. I began exercising again. Not to change my body, just to remember it existed beyond aching feet and oven burns. I booked Theo and me a weekend trip, just 2 nights in the mountains. A small cabin, no Wi-Fi, just us. It was there under a canopy of trees and stars that he asked me the question I'd been bracing for. Why did he leave? We were roasting marshmallows. The night was quiet. I looked at my son, 12 now. Taller, thoughtful. Old enough to want more than fairy tales, young enough to still believe in honesty. I don't know, I said. I don't think it was about you. Or even me. I think some people get scared of the kind of love that asks them to grow. Theo poked the fire. That sounds lonely. It is, I said. But he made a choice. And we made ours. He nodded. I'm glad he left. I exhaled. Not from relief, but from knowing he'd decided that for himself. Back at the bakery, I began writing again. I hadn't written in years. Not since college, before Theo, before the collapse. But late at night, in the quiet after closing, I started jotting little reflections. Notes on what it meant to build something from nothing. What it meant to mother while grieving. What it meant to forgive yourself for surviving imperfectly. Ruby read one. This is beautiful, she said. You should publish these. I shook my head. Who would read them? She gave me a look. The same people who eat your cookies, people hungry for something real. I started posting small entries on our bakery's blog. Nothing dramatic. Just pieces of our story tied to recipes. The cinnamon scone I burned the night I cried. The lemon curd that made me believe again. They went viral. Not huge, not national. But women, mothers, daughters, business owners began messaging me. I see myself in this. I thought I was alone. Thank you for saying this out loud. It stunned me. I'd spent years trying to be invisible, to not take up too much space, to not ask for too much, to not break. Now my voice, soft, shaky, was helping others find theirs. And just like that, another door opened. One afternoon, I got an email from a local college. They'd read my blog and asked if I'd consider speaking at a women's entrepreneurship event. The idea terrified me. Public speaking wasn't in my skill set, cookies and resilience were. But Theo saw the email over my shoulder. You should do it, he said. Why? Because you built all this with no map. That's what they need to hear. So I said yes. The event was held in a sunlit auditorium. 60 women, notebooks open, faces eager. I stood behind the podium, heart racing, hands shaking. I didn't talk about profit margins or branding. I talked about scraping dough from bowls at 2 a.m., about crying in fridges, about burning the first 100 cookies before getting it right. I talked about guilt and grit, motherhood and shame, trust and terror. And I told them this. You don't need to be unbreakable to build something lasting. You just need to be brave enough to show up broken and keep going. The room went silent. Then someone clapped. Then another. Soon it was a standing ovation. I cried. Again. That night I came home to Theo reading on the couch. He looked up. How did it go? I sat beside him, still in my blazer, still stunned. I think I helped someone. He smiled. Told you. And for the first time in a long time, I believed I could be more than what I had to be. Not just a survivor, not just a baker, not even just a mom, but a woman who had risen and was still rising. 2 years ago, I would have laughed at the idea of having a business mentor. Back then, mentorship felt like something reserved for corporate women in tailored suits, with corner offices and 5-year plans. I had none of that, just flour under my nails, hope in my pockets, and a son who depended on me more than I could say. But success, even small and local, has a way of attracting attention. The week after my college speech, I received a message from a woman named Evelyn Tran, CEO of a regional cafe chain, well known for championing women-owned businesses. She had read my blog. "I think you have more to build," she wrote. "I'd love to talk." I Googled her 3 times before responding. Her profile was intimidating articles in Forbes, a TED Talk with 1 million views, sharp suits, sharper eyes. But something about her email felt warm, open, curious. So I said yes. We met at one of her cafes. I wore my nicest sweater and tried not to fidget. She ordered black coffee, no sugar. I had chamomile tea. We sat in a corner booth, sunlight filtering through the window. "You've built something powerful," she said after hearing my story. "And rare." I shrugged. "I'm just trying to survive." "That's what most of us start doing," she said. "But at some point, survival becomes leadership whether we're ready or not." That stuck with me. She asked about my long-term goals. I confessed I hadn't thought beyond the next payroll cycle. She smiled. "Then that's our first task, letting you dream responsibly." Over the next few months, Evelyn became a quiet presence in my life. She didn't hover, didn't pressure. But every so often she'd send me resources, a podcast, a spreadsheet template, a reminder to delegate more. She even came to the bakery once unannounced. I was elbow deep in batter when I looked up and saw her by the counter biting into one of Theo's peanut butter cookies. "These are dangerous," she said with a grin. Theo beamed from behind the register. She gave me a nod that said, "You're doing it right." It meant more than any award ever could. But with growth came harder choices. One evening, Ruby pulled me aside. "I've been offered a teaching position," she said. "Pastry at the local community college." My heart sank. "It's part-time," she added quickly. "I'd still work mornings, but—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. She had been my anchor since day one, my honest mirror, my second heart. Letting her go, even partially, felt like losing a limb. But I swallowed my fear. "You should do it," I said. "You've taught me more than you know." She smiled, eyes wet. "I'll still be around. I just want to pass it on." I nodded. "You already have." The next week we held a quiet send-off, just coffee, a card, and a group hug in the back room. She left behind her apron and a handwritten binder titled Ruby's No-Nonsense Kitchen Bible. I kept it on the top shelf. Life moved forward. Theo turned 13. We threw a small party in the bakery after closing. Clara made a cake shaped like a giant cookie. Theo insisted on baking his own dozen. His friends cheered when he brought them out, slightly uneven but full of heart. He was growing into someone thoughtful, steady, a little quieter than most kids, but deeply observant. One night he asked me, "Do you ever wish you had a different life?" We were walking home from the shop, the moon full above us. I thought for a moment. Sometimes I wish the road had been easier, but I don't wish for different. I just wish I'd been kinder to myself along the way. He nodded like he understood more than he let on. "Your life made mine," he said, simply, and that was that. But peace doesn't mean stagnation. Evelyn invited me to a women's business summit later that spring. I was hesitant. Who was I to sit among CEOs and serial founders? But she insisted, "You have something they don't, proximity to your purpose." So I went. The room was full of polished women in sleek suits, sharing metrics and marketing strategies. I felt out of place in my soft cardigan and scuffed flats. But when I spoke about baking through heartbreak, about survival as strategy, about turning pain into dough, the room leaned in. Afterward, 3 women approached me, tears in their eyes. "Your story gave me permission," one said. "To start small. To start scared." That night, back in the hotel room, I sat by the window and watched the city lights. And for the first time, I said aloud, "I'm proud of myself." Not grateful. Not relieved. Proud. Proud that I didn't give up when the checks bounced. Proud that I let Ruby teach me. proud that I held Theo through every storm, proud that I built something that didn't just feed but nourished. Evelyn called the next morning. "I have one more offer," she said, "and you can say no." My stomach fluttered. "I'm launching a mentorship incubator for women-owned bakeries. We'll fund 5 small shops. I want Soul Sugar Co. to be the flagship. You'd host trainings. Speak. Mentor. Share what you've lived." It was overwhelming. Humbling. I said I'd think about it. Then I hung up, called Theo, and asked him a question. If we had to share our bakery not just with customers but with other women, would that be okay with you? He didn't hesitate. That would make it more powerful, right? Yes, I whispered. So much more. The morning of our mentorship launch, I woke before sunrise. The bakery was still silent in that sacred way only 5 a.m. allows. I stood in the center of the shop, taking in everything: the smell of fresh yeast, the worn wood of the counter. Theo and I built the sunlight just beginning to trace the edges of the display case. It had been 3 years since we opened. 3 years since I sold cookies out of desperation and prayed each tray would buy me another week of rent. Now Soul Sugar Co. was a cornerstone of the neighborhood and about to become something even bigger. We were hosting our first group of mentees that day, 5 women from different corners of the city. All of them had stories like mine: survivors, single mothers, women with dreams on paper and flour on their aprons. And they were nervous, just like I once was. The staff arrived in waves. Amy brought flowers. Clara made special badges. Even Ruby showed up, though she wasn't scheduled. She handed me a coffee and smirked. "You ready to be the wise old baker now?" I laughed. "Only if I get to wear a cloak." By 10, the mentees had arrived. They were wide-eyed, clutching notebooks, looking around like the bakery was some kind of cathedral. I remembered that feeling of wanting something so badly it made your breath shake. We gathered in the back kitchen. I took a deep breath and began. "My name is Mira," I said. "And I built this place when I had nothing but a child and a cookie recipe." They listened like I was reciting scripture. "I know what it's like to cry into dough, to count coins at midnight, to wonder if anyone will believe in what you're building. I also know that what you're doing matters more than you think, because women like us, we don't just bake. We heal. We hold. We build homes inside ovens." The day passed in a blur of laughter, flour, and teary confessions. We shared recipes not just of food, but of survival. We showed them how we prepped trays, ran the register, handled customers, managed mistakes. At one point, Theo came in from school and helped teach one of the younger women how to weigh dough precisely. "He's the original investor," I joked. Later, I found him sitting by the window with his sketch pad drawing the new trainees. "Are you happy?" I asked him. He looked up. "Yeah. I like that we're helping people now." I sat beside him. "You know, there were nights I thought we'd never make it." He smiled. "But you didn't stop." Neither did he. That evening, after the last tray had been wrapped and the mentees had gone home, some with cookies, some with dreams, I stood at the sink washing bowls when I heard a voice behind me. "You really did it," Ruby said softly. I looked around. The kitchen was still warm. My heart was full. "Yeah," I said. "I did." But it wasn't just me. It was Ruby who stayed through every burnout, Amy who brought precision when I lost clarity, Clara who sprinkled joy like powdered sugar, Theo who believed in me even when I didn't, and every woman who walked in needing sweetness and found a piece of herself. This bakery wasn't just a business, it was a blueprint. A reminder that healing is rarely loud, that transformation begins at the corner of exhaustion and grace. As we turned off the lights, I traced my fingers over the edge of the counter. There was no ceremony, no applause. Just quiet. Just light. Just peace. And that, after everything, was the sweetest reward of all. Final emotional fade out. 250 words. If you had told me years ago that I would end up here not just standing, but standing tall, I would have laughed. I was the woman with grocery store debt, with shoes full of holes, with a son who deserved better than I could give. But sometimes survival is the seed of something beautiful. Sometimes what starts in desperation becomes legacy. I learned that success isn't about perfection, it's about resilience. It's about asking for help and showing up anyway. It's about baking through grief, parenting through burnout, and loving yourself enough to let others in. My bakery is full of imperfect things: cracked crusts, lopsided loaves, cookies too soft to package. But they sell out every week. Because people don't come here for perfection, they come here for truth. And that's what I built: a place where truth can rise. So, to every woman listening who's tired, who's scared, who thinks she's not enough, you are more than enough. And if I could build a home from sugar and grief, you can build anything. You just have to start. Thank you for listening to my story. If it meant something to you, please share yours in the comments or subscribe to Grace's Truth for more stories like mine. Because the world needs what only you can rise into.